They called her a wife, a footnote, a supporting character in a story she helped write. But Lee Krasner didn't orbit genius. She built it, argued with it, protected it. And then, when the world finally gave her room, she painted like a storm system. This is Art Happens, the divine mess of art history, and I'm James William Moore, your tour guide through this mess. Today, we're doing an artist snapshot, where we grab one artist, one life, one lightning bolt moment, and watch what it did to history. Today, Lee Krasner, not Jackson Pollock's wife, a force. There's an old trick the art world loves. Call the man the genius, and the woman context. If she paints, well then it's secondary. If she edits, supportive. If she organizes, helpful. If she sacrifices, devoted. And if she helps build the very conditions that allow a movement, a reputation, or an art world myth to thrive, history gets weirdly quiet about that part. Lee Krasner lived inside that trick and spent her whole career ripping it in half. Because this is not just a story about a woman overshadowed by a more famous husband. That version is too tidy, too convenient, and too flattering to the systems that made it happen. This is a story about ambition, about discipline, about reinvention, about artistic will, and about what it means to keep making art when the room keeps trying to name you as something smaller than what you are. And Lee Krasner knew that room well, and she just refused to stay small inside it. Lee Krasner was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, born Lena Krasner, and from early on she wanted art, like oxygen. Not casually, not decoratively, not as a hobby to be indulged until something more practical came along. She wanted it seriously, professionally, relentlessly. And that matters, because one of the laziest habits in art history is acting like women just sort of arrive in relation to men, as if their real story begins only when the famous husband walks into the frame. But by the time Jackson Pollock appears in Krasner's life, she is already deeply trained, deeply committed, and very much in pursuit of her own artistic future. She studied at Cooper Union at the National Academy of Design, and later with Hans Hofmann, where she absorbed ideas about modernism, structure, abstraction, and pictorial energy. Hofmann, of course, is also tied to one of those infamous art history moments, one of those comments that manages to sound like praise while carrying sexism in its back pocket. And honestly, that tracks. Because Krasner kept running into a pattern that will feel depressingly familiar. Admiration, but qualified. Recognition, but partial. Access, but conditional. She also worked during the Depression, including through the WPA Federal Art Project, which is worth mentioning because so many great US artists passed through that world of government-supported labor, public culture, and practical survival. And survival matters, because art sounds romantic until rent shows up. When Krasner enters the New York art scene, she is not a wide-eyed muse wandering in to admire genius. She is already trained, already working, already ambitious, already in the room. And frankly, that room should have taken her more seriously sooner. Krasner and Pollock met in 1942, preparing for the same exhibit. And right there, that should tell you something. They were not meeting because she was an admirer at the edge of the scene. They were meeting because they were both artists, both present, both participating in the same emerging modern art world. But this is where the story usually tilts. Pollock becomes the headline. Krasner becomes the parentheses. He becomes the myth, the wild man, the raw nerve, the embodiment of US artistic masculinity in paint-splattered boots. She becomes the supporting structure, the wife, the stabilizer, the helper, the manager of chaos. And to be clear, she did do extraordinary labor around his career. She championed the work, helped create the conditions for it to be seen, protected space around his practice, defended his seriousness, connected him within the art world, helped shape the narrative that turned promising painter into legend. That is real labor, cultural labor, interpretive labor, career-building labor, myth-making labor. And yet, the perversity of the whole thing is that the more effectively she helped secure his place in history, the easier it became for history to treat her as secondary. That's the trap door. A woman can be central to the architecture of greatness and still get written as a decorative trim. After Pollock's death in 1956, she managed his estate and protected his reputation through shifting fashions, markets, and critical moods. Again, not small work, not emotional cleanup, not merely domestic devotion with better paperwork. This is strategic cultural stewardship. It is legacy work. It is a form of authorship in its own right. And still, for years, the shorthand stayed lazy. Pollock, genius. Krasner, wife. History really does love a lazy caption. Let's say the quiet part out loud. Genius is not just a compliment. It's a category. It's a performance, a cultural permission slip. And for a long time, the art world handed that permission slip to men far more easily than it ever handed it to women. Abstract Expressionism especially loved a certain kind of story. Big gesture, big ego, big risk, big man. The movement became wrapped in ideas of virility, aggression, scale, rawness, spontaneity, all coded as masculine, as presented as heroic. Critics helped, institutions helped, the media helped, collectors helped, the whole machine helped. And inside that machine, the labor women performed often got them renamed into something smaller, not authorship, support, not vision, sensitivity, not innovation, response, not leadership, helpfulness. So Krasner's role gets translated downward. Wife, caretaker, editor, steward, support system, anything. Anything but fully legitimate artist on her own terms. Which is especially maddening because her actual work refuses that diminishing frame. Krasner does not settle into one safe, recognizable signature and repeat herself into market comfort. She changes, pushes, revises, destroys and rebuilds, reinvents. That kind of restlessness is often praised as fearless experimentation when men do it. When women do it, too often it gets read as inconsistency. But Krasner's refusal to sit still stylistically is not weakness. It's evidence of rigor, of appetite, of an artist willing to let herself calcify into brand identity. And honestly, that makes her more interesting, not less. Now, to be fair, the marriage itself was complicated. This is not a neat morality play, where one artist is purely villain and the other purely victim. Pollock's struggles were real. The relationship was real. The intimacy was real. The care was real. The damage was real too. And that complexity matters because women in art history are so often flattened into symbols. The muse, the martyr, the neglected wife, the loyal widow. Krasner deserves better than symbolic flattening. She was in a double bind. If she advocated for Pollock, that labor got treated as feminine support. If she advocated for herself, she risked being cast as difficult, competitive, or ungenerous. If she preserved the marriage and the myth, she disappeared. If she pushed too hard against it, she could be accused of betraying the very history she helped secure. That is a brutal position to occupy, and a familiar one. because women are still asked in subtler and not so subtle ways to make the room run smoothly without appearing to need the room for themselves. Krasner knew how to operate inside that contradiction, but she also painted against it. And that's the part I do not want lost. Her work is not just happening alongside the gender politics of her moment. Her work is happening through them, against them, despite them. Which means every canvas is carrying more than form and color. It's carrying pressure, resistance, self-definition, persistence. And that gives the work its bite. After 1956, something changes physically, emotionally, psychologically, artistically. Krasner begins using the barn studio in Springs, the space Pollock had used, and suddenly the scale can shift. That matters more than it may sound, because studio space is not neutral. Space changes what the body can do, what the canvas can become, what ambition can physically occupy. And when Krasner gets access to that larger space, the work opens up. Not politely, not cautiously, not like somebody tiptoeing through inherited territory. It opens up like weather. The paintings from these years feel charged, not just with grief, though grief is there, and not just with release, though release is there too, but with scale finally meeting force. It's as if the work had been waiting for a room big enough to hold what she was carrying. And what comes out is extraordinary. The Umber paintings, made roughly between 1959 and 1962, have this concentrated, muscular intensity. They feel inward and expansive at the same time, like thought, grief, structure, and emotion all colliding in a dark, dense register. Then later, color comes back with force, and not in some sweet little return to joy narrative. Let's not cheapen it. The color comes back like authority, like re-entry, like the work claiming a new range without needing permission. Her late paintings have this remarkable combination of control and volatility. They feel deliberate, but not tame, emotional, but not sensational, structured, but still alive with movement. And that's the part of what makes them so powerful. They are not an afterthought to a famous man's story. They are the evidence of an artist expanding beyond the frame that story tried to put around her. This is the moment where the narrative should flip. Not, she survived him. More like, she expanded. One of the things I admire most about Lee Krasner is that she did not confuse consistency with truth. She was willing to change, and change again, and again. She cut up earlier works, reworked forms, tested new structures, moved through different phases without apologizing for the moment, without apologizing for the movement itself. That takes courage. Because the art world loves to tell artists to find your thing, which can sometimes really mean find the version of yourself we really know how to market. Krasner never seemed all that interested in becoming predictable for other people's convenience. Thank God. Because what you get instead is a body of work that feels alive to process, alive to difficulty, alive to shifts in mood and thought and energy. That kind of reinvention can make historians uncomfortable because it resists easy packaging. But easy packaging is not the same as artistic greatness. In fact, sometimes it's the enemy of it. Krasner's career asks us to value evolution, not just recognizability, to value persistence, not just headline mythology, to value the artist who keeps making, keeps changing, keeps pressing forward, and even when the world keeps trying to caption her incorrectly. And that feels very contemporary. So why does Lee Krasner matter now? Not just as a corrective, not just as a historical footnote upgraded into fairness, but as a living force in how we think about art. because she exposes how history gets written, who gets centered, who gets named, who gets mythologized, who gets absorbed into somebody else's glow. And she also models something bigger than correction. She models artistic stamina, self-renewal, refusal, the power of continuing to make serious work even when the story around you is profoundly inadequate. Krasner matters because she makes it possible, or at least harder, to keep telling the old lazy story where male genius arrives fully formed and women merely tidy the edges. No, she was in the making of modernism, in the making of myth, in the making of painting itself. And once you really see that, the old caption starts to look embarrassingly small. And it should. Here's what I want to leave you with. Lee Krasner was never a footnote. She was never an accessory. She was never the soft part of the story. She was an artist with training, hunger, discipline, and force who kept making art through dismissal, through shadow, through grief, through bad framing, through history's habit of looking past women and calling it objectivity. They called her a wife. History is catching up. She was a force. You've been listening to Art Happens, the divine mess of art history, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, your chaotic tour guide through art history. If this episode lit a match in your brain, share it with a friend who's tired of women being written into the margins, or with anyone who's ready to stop confusing proximity to genius with the absence of genius in your own right. Until next time, stay curious and don't let history get away with lazy captions.